So can we change is a very good question, because I'm pretty sure a lot of us try to change, perhaps put lots of efforts and, pumped ourselves up with a lot of motivation and desire to do next year better. But what happens a few weeks down the line? Majority of us fall back into the old patterns. So in this talk, I will cover, why does that happen? Why do we go back to the old patterns? And can we actually change? Now, to answer that, as a neuroscientist, of course, I look at the brain and I try to get insights and in understanding human behavior based on the functioning of various areas of human brain and brain chemistry and things like that. And this is kind of real size, actually, human brain. I always have it somewhere nearby. My friends laugh at me. I always carry rubber brain with me, which it kind of looks quite simple. It looks like one solid blob, but actually has many, many parts within it. Now, those parts haven't all evolved at the same time. If we look at evolution, the most ancient parts are at the bottom of the brain, just right there, they grouped into so-called lizard brain complex. There's multiple areas that kind of group based on when they evolved. Newest centers of the brain, called mammal brain there, in the center of the brain, just there, evolved after that. And the newest addition to the brain is all the wrinkly bit called neocortex, or the human brain. Now, those three different components of human brain, they have kind of different agenda for your life. Lizard brain only cares about you staying alive. So it controls your heartbeat, digestion, breathing, certain centers of consciousness are there as well. Mammal brain, also called limbic system, wants you to stay safe. In order to ensure that, it creates very stable, strong habits. So to make sure that you repeat behaviors which gave a good outcome at the end of it. So mammal brain always wants to predict what's going to happen next. And it achieves that via kind of repetition of the same old and pushing you away from the behaviors which caused you pain in the past. Crucial centers for various kinds of memory are in the mammal brain. And mammal brain is a center that only cares about your own safety. In other words, there is a certain level of selfishness, but in evolution, selfishness is good in a sense, because we need to survive first in order to help others to survive. Mammal brain centers communicate to other centers in the language of emotions. So it creates emotions we hate if it detects any danger in the environment. And it creates emotions we enjoy, such as happiness, trust, love, if it detects something that could be good for our survival. So in other words, just creating different emotions in our brain and body, it steers us towards certain situations and away from other situations based on our past experiences with similar situations. Now, the third component, the human brain, or neocortex, and it's a bit confusing, human brain within the human brain, but the reason it's called human brain by Paul MacLean is because humans have the most evolved neocortex in comparison to other animals. Now, some mammals have a thin layer of neocortex as well, such as rodents, but it's nowhere near as complex as for us humans. Now, this part is the part of you which wants you to be your best self. It enables you to critically think, learn, be creative, have higher aspirations, want to make best decisions and being able to make rational decisions as well. Collaboration, empathy, understanding others, also called theory of mind, come from those centers as well. And this center is crucial for us to create a deliberate change. Mammal brain absolutely hates change. Lizard brain it just takes care of their physiological needs. So on every single day, mammal brain and human brain can have disagreements, because your mammal brain would want you to eat exact same food, hang out with exact same people. And actually, a lot of times, mammal brain would just want you to stay in the house and never leave the house, really, because that's the safest place. Now, human brain wants you to travel, to do new things, to change careers, to set up your business and things like that. And sometimes they might kind of fight with each other. Those different centers require different amounts of energy. And just to illustrate that, I use different vehicles, such as lizard brain is like one of those annoying Vespas. Now, if you are from London, I've seen quite a lot of those in Italy as well. They're quite annoying Vespas everywhere around in the bigger cities, right? They can't go very fast and they don't need much fuel, but they're always on. They're really, really they can go on for long periods of time with small amount of fuel. That's what the lizard brain is. It's on day and night. It's always active because if it stopped, we would die. Mammal brain is like a light car here, Audi TT in the picture. Or you can insert your favorite car if you like. It's on most of the time when we are awake, and certain centers are sleeping and resting during the night, while other centers are still processing memories when we are asleep. Mammal brain allows us to be on autopilot. Like when you, for example, actually coming back to the driving a car metaphor, when we're driving a car, we can do it automatically because mammal brain centers overtaken that. We don't need to think about it. And that level of automaticity is with a lot of other things, what things we eat for breakfast, what are our habits and routines during the day. Now, human brain or neocortex is like a plane. It requires enormous amounts of energy, and it can be active only for between 4 and 6 hours a day, because not only it needs lots of energy, it uses up brain chemicals called neurotransmitters, which take time then for the brain to produce them again. So due to that, and then all the other changes that need to happen in the periods of rest, we can't use that area all the time. So we kind of have to be a little bit selective what we use that for. Now, when we are tired or stressed or going through any kind of emotionally challenging period in our lives, there isn't enough energy for human brain. The energy is kind of gets depleted, and we automatically revert to the mammal brain driven old habits, which are automatic, don't require us making actual rational decisions. So we can just be on autopilot. It's much kind of more comfortable and less energy consuming. So in that state, we can't learn. In that state, we can't be creative. We can't make the best decisions. We can't be empathic. I give you an example. If you come back home after, okay, we don't really go to work due to the pandemic, but imagine you've been working in your office really, really hard. And you've been quite stressed and really tired, and you go upstairs, and your partner or your child wants your attention and are really eager to see you. How empathic and understanding can you be at that state? Probably not very. And sometimes we say the things we don't mean, and that's just very like pure energetic kind of very physical process. Your human brain needs time to relax and rest. So good, tip for that. We say, what, just give me half an hour to just have a drink, have some food, and just maybe just rest for a little bit. And then I'll talk to you. Then I'll be interested to hear all you have to say. So when we try to make change, if we leave it to the end of the day, or if we try to do that when we are really stressed or going through emotionally tricky times, the chances of success are very, very low. So we have to be quite picky on when we are trying to incorporate change. Now let's look a little bit deeper. Now within the human brain, at the very front of it, just there, if you put your hands on your forehead and cover like that, you cover your prefrontal cortex. That's the very big part at the very front of the brain. And that's the smartest part of your brain. This area enable us so-called executive functions, so rational thinking, planning, prioritizing, decision-making, problem solving, and so on. But also crucial aspects of our personality, such as sense of self, willpower, motivation, empathy are in that part. And this part in particular, we need to create a deliberate change and to resist temptations, to resist falling back into the old patterns. Now, on the other hand, in the limbic system or mammal brain, we have the area called amygdala, and that's the red little almond-shaped area in the picture. Amygdala can easily sabotage our prefrontal cortex functioning. Amygdala is always looking out for any potential danger real or imaginary. So it looks out in the environment, it monitors other people's behaviors, but also our own thoughts. It's sufficient just to think the worst case scenario for amygdala to switch on. And amygdala doesn't know the difference. Amygdala believes what you think, in other words. And it creates emotions such as anxiety, fear, anger, to kind of warn us about those potential dangers. Also, anything that caused you pain in the past, amygdala stores all those painful memories and makes the kind of us more and more sensitive to those situations in the future. So in other words, we all get amygdala oversensitized over time. And amygdala absolutely freaks out when there is too much novelty. It hates when we try to make change too suddenly, if we try to change a lot of things all at once. Amygdala loves familiarity and can't stand uncertainty. But the worst thing being that amygdala and prefrontal cortex is in particular other part of prefrontal cortex called ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is just prefrontal cortex on the inside there. They are connected to one another, which means there is bidirectional connection. So our thoughts can induce emotions due to that connection, but also our emotions can completely switch off our rational thinking. It's called amygdala hijack. Now, if you try to remember time when you were really angry, like furious, or very jealous, or scared, extremely scared. Now, has any of you said something or done something that you regretted afterwards, right? If you're like majority of us, you probably have. And that's due to that amygdala hijack. Now, once the prefrontal cortex is hijacked by amygdala, it takes about 15 minutes for prefrontal cortex to go back to kind of normal state. So it's usually a good idea not to make any important decisions in that 15-minute period. Now, amygdala and prefrontal cortex, they kind of create sort of different types of thinking. If we are in the state when our amygdala is running the show, we become like a different person, as opposed to when we're in a well-rested state, in a quite good state emotionally, when prefrontal cortex can run the show. So amygdala dominant thinking kind of makes us all creatures of habit, pushes it all into the same old habits. And we can't really resist irrational habits. Usually procrastination thrives in amygdala dominant thinking, or binge eating or other habits we kind of try to overcome. We become safety driven, every single one of us, and fearful. We resist novelty and change. We become much more judgmental than usual. And amygdala distorts our reality because it kind of amplifies negativity in the world and completely ignores positivity. So we kind of start noticing only one side of the world, really. And also it kind of creates that negative mind chatter. And it creates so-called downward spiral, because that state creates more things to worry about. Now, when we're in prefrontal cortex dominant state, we're capable of constant learning and change. There is no limits to the brain plasticity in that state. We are deliberate and rational, so we can execute what we decide to do. We can empathize with others, we can accept the differences, and we're willing to learn from other people's way of being. Every single one of us in that state are authentic and kind of different, because when we're in the amygdala dominant state, we kind of all more or less similar. In prefrontal cortex dominant state, we're individualistic and authentic. We are motivated about things we do, and we know what things are thriving for us. We see growth, contribution, understanding. Our perception is much more objective. We are much more open-minded, and our thinking is flexible, capable to adjust and learn. So another part of actually creating change is managing those states. So we need to soothe the amygdala before we can get in prefrontal cortex dominant state, because if amygdala gets triggered, which inevitably it does in the tricky times of these days, there is lots of things for amygdala to worry about. We need to do constant daily activities to soothe the amygdala. Some things include breathing exercises. And if you like in Q&A, I can talk you through breathing exercise to calm your amygdala down. Meditation, physical exercise. Oh, certain foods, especially actually carbohydrates, help to calm amygdala down, strangely. And that's why we're drawn to those foods when we are anxious. Physical contact, like hugging people, stroking a pet, cuddling a child. Caring behaviors, doing something for other people calms amygdala down. There is so-called inner child healing techniques in therapy, which specifically focus on amygdala. And directing attention to positives, so such as writing gratitude list, what went well today list, and so on. In addition to that, we can also do activities that stimulate prefrontal cortex, such as talking things through with a friend. Rationally assessing situation. It's called cognitive reappraisal. Like, is it really dangerous, that situation? So for example, people who are scared of public speaking, for them to assess, what's the worst thing that could happen? Will I die if the talk doesn't go well, in other words? And sometimes it does help to actually soothe the amygdala via that stimulating prefrontal cortex. Very importantly, if you were to only get one thing from this slide, taking breaks. How often? About an hour and a half of work a day requires a break after. And if you are stressed, if your job is quite stressful, then you need to take breaks even more frequently, because prefrontal cortex gets exhausted quite easily. And if we just carry on working, pushing through, we kind of naturally slip back into the mammal brain dominant thinking, amygdala dominant thinking, because of the energy depletion. Sleep, actually getting good quality sleep is crucial for prefrontal cortex working properly. Learning new things, being engaged in the tasks you enjoy. So in other words, practicing hobbies and other activities that feel fun for you, and physical exercise as well. Now, the third component of equation is when you try to do change, what associations are you assigning to this change? Well, let's imagine I'm trying not to eat cakes. Let's imagine that's a change. I'm just hypothetically saying, let's imagine I try to reduce eating, like, let's say, pastries, cakes, and so on. Now, while thinking about, not allowing myself to eat cakes, if I stimulate pain centers, so basically lack of reward, lack of that pleasant experience having delicious cake, in that case, I'm much less likely to do it. As opposed to if I look at all the benefits, what would be benefits for me of not eating cakes? Maybe I'll have more energy. Maybe my brain would be working more clearly. Maybe I'll have less migraines. Maybe I would feel better in my own body, and so on and so forth. So when we look at the positives, we're much more likely to actually achieve the change. Why is that? So when we anticipate pleasure, we activate reward centers. And sometimes it requires kind of putting some work in to twist our perception about, how that change would give me pleasure and reward. We secrete dopamine, which just naturally creates more motivation to do that. But also we secrete oxytocin, which in general, in addition, oxytocin in general is most known for creating trust and love and attachment and compassion. But more importantly, in this case, oxytocin dilates blood vessels in the brain. So then more glucose and oxygen arrives to your neocortex, which makes it function better. So in that state, we are much more prefrontal cortex dominant thinkers. So we are much more capable to rationally assess the situation and incorporate that change. We also, under oxytocin, we handle stress better, because oxytocin negates negative effects of stress to neuroplasticity. So kind of oxytocin in general makes us more robust and resilient. When certain change we're trying to incorporate associates with us with pain or, lack of something we enjoyed before, the completely different sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, which secretes adrenaline Noradrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline and cortisol are secreted in your body, and noradrenaline in the brain. They completely redistribute energy management. So your energy goes to your limbs. So you could basically fight or flight response. You could basically escape the danger or fight the danger away. And in that state, there is lack of oxygen to the and glucose to the neocortex, because blood vessels in the brain become really, really contracted. Moreover, in that state, if we experience that state over and over again, it compromises immune system, digestion, and it reduces brain plasticity, making it harder for us to change. So multiple reasons why that's tricky to change then. And the last aspect of creating change, anything we do, even things we think they are really bad habits, we get something out of it from any actions we do. And if we kind of realize, okay, this is the habit I don't like that I do, I want to change it, we first need to figure out what's good about it. What are we getting from it, in other words? And for that, quite a useful tool is the habit loop. So let's imagine somebody is trying to stop procrastination. Okay, so here for procrastination habit loop, what triggers your procrastination? Now, it would be individual for each of you, but let's say the task is overwhelming, or the task is boring, or the task causes stress, or whatever trigger is. So here, cue or trigger is something that sets the habit off. Once the habit set off, what's your routine? So here is doing any other activities but the task you actually need to do. So browsing Facebook and TikTok and other things, which kind of naturally allows us to escape from the unpleasant emotions. And what's the reward here? Is emotional relief most of the time, right? It could be variety, it could be safety, it could be various human needs we're trying to meet with it. But very important, if we're trying to change the habit, we need to identify what's setting the habit off and what am I getting out of it? So cue and reward. Now we want to maintain the same cue, the same reward, but we need to change the routine with something else that would create emotional relief as well. So in this case, let's say we're trying to use so-called Pomodoro technique, which I'll discuss in the next slide in a greater depth. With Pomodoro technique is a very good technique to actually, when the tasks seem unmanageable, they seem, I can hear one of you guys, by the way, if all could check that your microphones are on. Okay, so with Pomodoro technique, the task is, well, let me actually go to that. So Pomodoro technique is designed for when the tasks are so big that we get overwhelmed with it. Instead of focusing on the task, we focus on time we spend working on it. And there is single focus time. So here is 25 minutes of focusing on the task, 5 minutes break. 25 minutes working on the task, 5 minutes break. So there you focus on something what's in your control zone, which is how much time you actually try to do the task. Well, let's imagine this actually technique has been invaluable for me writing my book and writing my PhD thesis in the distant past. I didn't necessarily have the desire to procrastinate when I was writing my book, but I surely did when I was writing my PhD thesis. So what I did then, I'd written a kind of list of things I needed to do for, let's say, specific chapter, and broken them down and say, okay, I need to create a figure of which portrays that, okay, whatever that is. And I would spend 25 minutes working on that. And even if I didn't finish it, I would stop when the 25-minute timer went up, take 5 minutes break, and on the next Pomodoro cycle, I would continue the task. Now, what this technique did for me and for many of my clients, it suddenly kind of takes that emotional stress away, because I only need to focus on 25 minutes working on something specific. Suddenly I didn't think, oh, I need to write PhD thesis, is so big and such an overwhelming task. So naturally, it created emotional relief. Okay, and if you want to in Q&A, we can discuss that technique better and how it works. Now, let me summarize what are the key points of this talk today on how we can incorporate change. So firstly, there is a constant conflict between mammals' brain desire for safety and human brains strive for change, and that happens every day. Amygdala, which is part of mammal brain, can temporarily compromise the functioning of the prefrontal cortex, which is called amygdala hijack. Therefore, we need to do regular amygdala soothing activities while dealing with change. By the way, we can't choose whether our amygdala gets triggered or not. That's not in our control. But what we do after, and whether we act on it or whether we help the amygdala to calm down, that's in our control zone. Association with pleasure increases motivation and brain plasticity, making it actually easier for us to change. And we meet with any habit, we meet important needs. So we need to find better ways to meet exact same needs if we want to change the habit. In other words, we can't just completely get rid of the habit and leave the vacuum there, or else we are very, very much prone to just fall back into the same habit. We need to identify what exactly we're meeting and what could be better ways to meet that. And just to kind of as a last slide, as Camille mentioned there, this is my book if you're interested to learn more about why the F can't I change, which literally talks about different aspects of change and how to create change in different areas such as habits, emotional patterns, decision-making, relationships, communication, and so on. I'm happy to take any questions you have now, guys.